Hello everyone, it's Mystic Juicer back with another episode of Getting Good at Yomi. Apologies for the long absence between these episodes. I'm going to try to make sure that doesn't happen, although the next month is looking very, very busy for me. So bear with me, and I'm sure we'll get back on track very soon. So this episode is all about playing out of a bad hand. Every game of Yomi starts with you and your opponent with 7 cards in hand. But not all hands are created equal. Maybe you've started the game with a bunch of disconnected normals or holding just throws. A bad hand is one where none of your combat reveals are going to lead to good damage, or where you're missing or very low on an important combat option. So, for example, you have no throws or no blocks or somehow no attacks in hand. Now, the two can go hand in hand, but don't necessarily have to. Maybe you have insane damage in your hand, but it's because you drew nothing but attacks and you're facing a character or player that loves to block or dodge. Another example of a bad hand, and full credit to Bob199 for bringing this up, is where your hand has cards that aren't effective for the stage of the game you're in. So this can be an example of having lots of dodges or low damage reversals in the early game, for instance, or just the absence of good early game moves, like good starters, linkers, or blocks. Some characters have decks that are sharply divided between early and late game moves, or like Midori and Vendetta, they have devastating damage potential, but only if they have very specific cards in their hand. So if your character falls into either of these categories, you're probably going to find yourself relying on this guide more than others. So, what do you do when you're stuck with a hand full of hot garbage? So the key here is resource management. The answer to not having the right cards in hand is to find the right cards and get them in your hand. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. I know it's a short episode, but so obviously I'm just kidding, but that seriously is the answer. Get more or get better cards. How you actually go about doing that is going to depend a lot on what your hand looks like and what character you're playing, but keep that guiding principle in mind. You are now playing Yomi: Escape from Bad Hand Prison. But here's your map. You need to get more/different cards in your hand, and if you can, you want to keep your opponent from knowing that you're playing this game. So why the secrecy? Why does it matter if your opponent knows you have a bad hand? If you remember the previous episode on valuation, I made a big deal about how it's an important skill to be able to use your opponent's combat reveals as a way of gaining information about your opponent's hand. The more information about an opponent's hand you can gain, the better you'll be able to throw when it's least risky, attack when it's most beneficial, and block when they're loaded for bear. So think about this. Maximum damage off of dodge, throw, or attack gives you the least information about someone's hand. It tells you what they had, but it doesn't tell you what your opponent has, or even more importantly, it doesn't tell you what your opponent doesn't have. So, simple example. Assume this is sort of mid-game area, nobody's knocked down, it's completely happening in neutral. If Grave hits you with 3 into triple ace move, how likely is it that he has a 2? If he hits you with a 2 into Q, how likely is it that he has kings? Right? So basic examples of combat reveal, hand valuation type stuff. The trouble with Bad Hand Prison is that you are almost by definition unable to play your max damage option. And the more only okay or outright bad plays you make, the more information you're going to give your opponent who's paying attention. Unless they're also in bad hand prison, that means you're telling your opponent your hand is exploitable. Either they can safely throw a lot more often because you can't punish them with good attacks or good damage off of attacks, or if you have no throws, they can block more often if they're on low hand, or dodge more often and more successfully in the late game. So keeping that in mind, let's look at the actual options you have for playing out of this sort of stuff. So again, guiding principle is getting more cards, more options, different cards, different options. So first of all, does your character have abilities that can get you more cards? Is there, are you playing Quince, who has a lot of character abilities that just let him either potentially put more cards in his hand or straight up put more cards in his hand? Unless your end game really depends on these cards, and you're already low, consider them first. More cards is better than less cards, so it's unlikely this is going to give your opponent much to go on. So unless it's an extremely bad idea given the situation that you're in game, to play these cards to get more cards, play them. Okay, maybe you're playing a character who can't cheat. Can you block? Well, blocking is the most effective way most characters have of building up a hand. Barring, throw super moves like Midori's here, most characters deal less damage off of a throw than attacks or dodges. So you're also minimizing the max damage you're exposed to taking. So that's good. Blocking also gives your opponent fairly limited information about your hand. If you're blocking with a very valuable card, say your character's fastest throw, or a card with a very strong ability on it, then that probably means you don't have any other blocks in your hand, but that's about it. Depending on the situation, that might not give all that much information. It at least doesn't tell them anything about what attacks you might have in hand. Since it's a good idea to block even if you have a good hand, because you're very unlikely, barring some special circumstances or some specific characters, to be able to finish off a match without ever blocking. It's a good move to do because it doesn't look suspicious. You're blocking. Okay, yes, every character has to block anyway. If you start blocking very, very often, now your opponent's probably going to get suspicious. And you're probably exposed to getting thrown a lot. But even then, you might not have given away the game. You might just be playing a very block-heavy range. Characters like Lum, for instance, love blocking because they have tools to be able to deal damage outside of the combat reveal game. Characters with very punishing, card-efficient attacks can also get away with blocking more, because their opponents are going to be worried about eating a big damage combo if they get their throw stuffed. So if you're playing a character like Onimaru, it's pretty intimidating to try to throw Onimaru, because if he decides that's the turn he's going to play a 10 attack or an 8 attack, you're just giving free damage and free card draw to a pretty horrifying damage-dealing character. Characters that have very strong play off of their throws, for instance, any of the grapplers, or Zane, for instance, or Valerie, or characters with extremely powerful late-game plans and card-intensive combos, may get away with blocking a lot on bad but large hands, because it'll look a lot like their ordinary game plan of blocking a lot. So depending on what character you're playing, what specific matchup you're in, obviously Yomi is a game about matchups, you may be able to get away with more blocking than you would think. And generally, even if you're losing a combat where you've blocked, again, barring being hit with a super throw, you're probably taking less damage and punishment than you would if you had lost a combat with a throw reveal. So what if you can't block? Or even if you're blocking, but you're not getting a lot of good options, so you have to keep blocking, what are you going to do? You have a couple of options, but they're much less appealing than blocking. You can attack with normals. And if they're blocked or win combat, except against a grappler, of course, you get to draw a card. So that's great. Sort of. Remember, if you're playing non-optimal damage, that's going to tell your opponent something. And by definition, if you're stuck on a bad hand and you're poking with a normal attack to build hand, unless you follow that attack up with some kind of value, you're telling your opponent, yeah, I'm scared of being thrown because I don't have much here, and I want to be blocking much more. So if your opponent plays a face-down card, you have a great opportunity to mask your intentions of building a hand by respecting the Joker. Maybe take a few seconds before passing on the follow-up if you think it's going to help sell it. Don't just mash pass. Actually, even if it doesn't work, at least pretend that you're fooling your opponent. If your problem isn't the size of your hand, but the quality or combination of the cards in it, then you can consider playing some okay damage. Really good example of that would be like a 3-card straight, right? So in that situation, at least you're getting an ace out of it. Which may be of some help in terms of your hand quality. Maybe you're playing a character with a 2-ace and a 4-ace move. You're either, now you have that 2-ace move at least on deck, or you can threaten that you do. And playing for straights is typically, even if it might not be maximum damage, it's still a very good thing to do even if you have a good hand, because of that the fact that it gives you aces. So unless this is really going to cripple you in terms of your hand size or your hand quality, then a small straight is perfectly fine. So if you can't follow it up at all, or you can't do it without going to very low hand or losing all the attacks you have or something, just don't follow it up, even if they don't face down. 2 attack into nothing is pretty bad, but 2 attack into 3 is even worse. Dealing 3 extra damage isn't going to convince your opponent you have a good hand, and you're going card neutral on top of that when your goal is to be building more and different cards. So don't do that. Just, give up on the fact that probably your opponent knows what's up. So you're probably going to have to consider your opponent's throw game more seriously. So, playing a block attack, block normal attack range is very good here. Poking with further normals until your hand size or quality increases to some acceptable level. Again, the jig is basically up at this point. Just try to survive until your deck delivers you from this time of blockless or low block tribulation, and use your normal pokes to defend yourself against throws. So again, at this point, the jig is up, right? Don't try to continue it to convince your opponent, oh no, that was just a fluke, I pressed pass by accident, I really have a good hand, I swear. Just know that your opponent is probably going to want to throw a little bit more often, or if they have a very good hand and they think that you're going to defend yourself with kind of slow, crappy normals in order to build a hand, if they have a really good starter, a very fast starter, like Satsuki's Q, or even her Jack, this is where they're going to come out as well, because they're going to beat your poke range that's trying to defend against throws. So if you want to disguise your hand, you can also throw if your throw is knocked down. You're like, but wait, throwing is card neutral, like at best. There's no normal draw for throws, unless you're playing Persephone. Yeah, and that's true, but throwing without follow-up is good even on a good hand. So again, if we're still able to disguise the fact that we have a crappy hand, throwing for knockdown for most characters is quite good, even if they have a good hand. Why? Because knocking your opponent down and then going for a cross-up into big damage is a good move. So try to convince your opponent that's what you're doing. Obviously, you don't have massive damage because you're watching this video, but you can try to pass it off. You can actually successfully use this throw setup to disguise the fact that you have a bad hand. So, assuming you successfully throw them, if you've drawn a block, now you can block. And what this looks like is, you had damage in hand, but you're pretty sure that your opponent was going to play a reversal, so you're just playing it safe. So again, that's perfectly reasonable. If you haven't drawn block, again, your options aren't great. You can throw again, in which case you're saying, you're so confident they were going to block, they were just going to accept that they were going to try to take the 50-50 on an even or odd block. But you knew they were going to do that, so you just threw them again. Again, you don't have to follow it up because now you still totally have all that damage in hand, so you're just setting up again for that 50-50. Totally. You can go for the cross-up anyway. Again, that looks like, when you combat reveal it, it looks like you have good damage, otherwise why would you be playing it? If they play a face down, then great. Again, you can safely respect that. Don't follow it up. And, it just looks like, if you successfully bait a Joker, that's amazing. Even if you don't, well, you go up a card overall, and they go down a card, or down 2 cards, because one for the combat reveal and one for the face down. So that's great too. And finally, you can dodge. Probably the worst of the options. You better hope that they bluff, or else you're really definitely going to show you that you've got nothing in hand. Don't follow this up with an attack, like a normal attack or anything. That's just going to look really stupid. And then you've gone down 2 cards rather than just the 1. So, again, kind of risky, but you can potentially do this. If you successfully dodge something and they face down and you respect it, again, you might have baited a Joker. They've gone down more cards than you have overall, so that's also still a win. And you've continued this charade of disguising your bad hand. If all else fails, you can Joker. So don't do what I did when I was writing this guide, which is forget that Jokers exist and are a thing. Thanks, Deluxe, for pointing out that the lack of this area in my guide. But gold bursts, especially if you're giving your opponent signals that you've got a crappy hand, can give you immediate breathing room if you're successful. All of a sudden, you have good damage in your hand, at least for one combo. And for some characters who have abilities on their aces, you can threaten your primary game plan, like Persephone's Mistress Command or Onimaru's Clockwork Soldiers. Having 2 aces worth of damage in hand, or 2 ace abilities in hand, can let you get enough room to block way more often, as now your opponent really kind of has to think a little more carefully about throwing you. They may be, maybe they were willing to take 10 or 12 damage over a couple of turns to single normals, but the aces may give them pause, or even bait some dodges or reversals, and if you're blocking those, then you're really, really happy. The other benefit to gold bursting is that it's more likely to succeed if your opponent knows you're in a bad hand. Again, because they're probably going to be more inclined to throw or play other aggressive options in general. Because they're more effective, they have a higher payoff and less risk your opponent's on bad. So if you're in lethal range off an opponent's dodge, the above may just get you killed faster, but this isn't really a guide to deal with very late game. If you've gone to the late game and you're on low or crappy hand, either RNG has just pooped on you, or you've made some bad calls, or your opponent's made some really good ones to get you to this situation. This is more of a mid-game, early-game guide. Alternatively, if what you don't need is aces, you need some other cards of some kind, then, or you have those aces in hand, but it's still can't really get anything going, then blue bursting is a good option too. and it has the potential benefit of hurting your opponent's hand quality if they follow it up. You know, in addition to giving you the cards, it can also prevent some damage and blow off some of those excess cards if they follow it up with a big combo. So let's go back to that idea of being stuck in bad hand prison for an entire game. So try as you might, you just couldn't get out, your opponent took advantage and killed you. Okay. Assuming it wasn't the last game in the set, you have a chance to potentially spin some gold out of the straw of that loss. If you've been playing out of bad hand prison in a certain way, say you're playing a really high block and normal poke range, like you're mostly playing that game, then you can try to use that pattern against your opponent. So now, it's game 2 or game 3 in the set. Now you start blocking a lot and you start playing some kind of crappy normals. And then you follow that up with your biggest combo starter with maximum damage backup. So all of a sudden, that reasonable and low-risk throw your opponent played to take advantage of your crappy hand is sitting way at the top of their own personal sadness and regret leaderboard. Note, this is some more advanced advice courtesy of Leontes, winner of, among other things, International Yomi League 2, very strong player in the online community. But I preface this advice with the fact that it's very sound advice. Like, don't get me wrong, it is very good advice. Especially when you're facing opponents who pay attention to that sort of thing. So in other words, other high-level players. They have very strong evaluation basis, and then they're also playing, they're able to hone in on when other valuation-based players are playing on a crappy hand. And now you're playing this mix-up game, this additional layer of will he, won't he kind of thing. However, simulating a bad hand to set up a valuation trap is functionally the same as having a bad hand for a couple of turns, right? In that time where you're playing your crappy normals and blocking a lot, even though you have good damage in hand, you are playing crappy normals, which are risky, and blocking a lot, which may get you thrown if somebody catches on, faster than you expected them to. So the concept is sound, but remember, the payoff of your trap had better be very good. Like if you're setting up for a lethal combo, great. That's absolutely a time where this might be very, very effective. Or, it's going to get you lethal in a couple of turns later. Or it's setting you up for lethal on the turn after this thing hits. But the payoff had better be very good, or you may be risking much more than you're potentially gaining. So, in other words, yell at Leontes if this doesn't work, okay? Just leave me out of it. But seriously, it can be a very, very effective technique. Just be aware it has its limitations. It is riskier than, playing based on valuation alone. Just playing your good options. By definition, it's riskier because you aren't playing the best options in your hand. So I hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions or any matchup-specific advice, so much of this game and so much of this advice is really nuanced in terms of what characters it applies to and in what situations and what matchups in some cases. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on this video or go to the fantasystrike.com forums. The Yomi sub forum is very active, really friendly, and we'd be absolutely happy to answer any questions. So that's going to do it for this week. Once again, apologies for the long delays between these videos, guys. I'm going to try to be on top of this a little more. Work has just been really, really tough lately, and my weekends have gotten a bit busier as well. So I will do my best to bring more of these videos, and especially more matchup videos and commentary to you in the next little while. And yeah, in the meantime, with all that time that you're not spending watching these vids, play some more online games. We've still got quite active community Steam is still bringing a lot of new players into the game. There's a ton of tournaments going on right now. So come join us. Come join in the fun. All right. Thanks again. This is Mystic Juicer, and I'll see you guys next time.